Hello, and welcome to Under 1000. My name's Thomas Flower, and each episode I'll read you a new piece of flash fiction. All of the stories are 1,000 words or less. Today, I'll be reading Life in the Machine. Please be aware that this episode deals with themes of death and dying. So if that's likely to upset you, or anyone that you're listening with, then you might want to skip this one. His body was failing, but his mind could be saved. They had to decide whether it was worth keeping him alive still, whether a life inside the machine was one worth having. The cost was not inconsiderable, at least for anyone else. But what did it matter for them? They had money, and they wanted Grandpa still with them, even if it was only in the most limited way imaginable. They said yes. The technology was already in place. They had been trialing it for some years now. Virtual simulations where the mind could be held, keeping it alive and aware enough to go on living. The entire body would be reduced to another piece of the machine, kept alive through tubes and wires, which pumped in the necessary elements with mechanical precision. But the brain? That would be saved, kept stimulated and agile by being allowed to roam free in a fictitious world which held the semblance of reality. As the procedures were put in place, and parts sourced for what was to come, the family waited to hear from the doctors and scientists now tasked with keeping Grandpa in their lives. When the news finally came, it was good. They were told that he had taken well to the simulated reality so far, and that brain scans showed that despite the rest of his body having given up almost entirely, his mind was still functioning at the level they would hope for in any normal, healthy patient. It was a relief. They may not have been able to have and hold him in the same way anymore, but at least they knew that they had saved him from the grave, or a slow death rotting away on the machines. He was still living, just not in the traditional sense. That's what they understood. What the scientists did not tell them, however, was how careful they had to be in calibrating the strange, unreal world they had built. Although the fantasy of a life still lived was what kept the man alive, they did not want him knowing that it was a fantasy after all. In the experiments they had undertaken with the dead and dying in the earlier days, they had quickly found out that those who were given free rein over a clearly virtual experience would quickly grow bored and depressed. With such a boundaryless existence, it seemed, the brain would be forced to be self-sustaining, essentially carried on by the ability to excite itself with new and novel things to do within the realms of its own imagination. As such, the longer the experience went on, the more they would see depression and inactivity in the patients they kept stored, leading, in almost all cases, to a position where the brains became so inactive that they either died of their own accord, or were deemed no longer worth saving by the families and medical staff who attended to them. It wasn't that they didn't try, of course. Working with the programmers on their team, they would add more and more to the simulation, creating limitless possibilities, a series of endless, infinite worlds to be explored, experienced, and excited by. But the problem was that patients seemed to become tired of the endless choice. When faced with the idea that they could do whatever they like, they tended to not know what to do. Within the simulations, They reported the experience as feeling hollow, meaningless, distressing. Knowing that they could do what they want, but that none of it would have an impact on the real world they had left behind, made them feel depressed and hopeless, as though they were stuck in a shallow sideshow attraction where they were faced with infinite entertainment, but no real purpose or direction. Deterioration was inevitable. Only one of the trial group still remained. However, as their first true customer, the team was sure that they would be able to keep this old man alive for his family by ensuring he had no knowledge of his situation. They made his simulation as realistic as possible, gave him a life, a job, a sense of purpose and a reason to keep on going. They did everything they could to convince him that he was still alive in a more traditional sense, rather than a brain attached to a body made largely of mechanized parts. And it seemed like this new tactic was working, at least at first. The trouble was, of course, that they had no way to build death into the simulation. They could remove many aspects which would hint at it easily enough: disease, aging, conflict, disasters. But they could not remove it entirely without making it clear that the reality the patient found himself in was not real at all. And so, after several months of stability, they noticed a sudden dip. An accident had happened within the world, one which should have been fatal for the poor old man. And yet, he had gone on, undeterred. Unable to process it, the brain had taken to questioning the very experience of being alive, suddenly doubtful of the truths presented. They knew it was only a matter of time. Once he saw through the facade, they would be faced with the same problem all over again. Inevitably, he would experience the limitless possibilities of a simulated reality, and then slowly begin to fade as life within a machine exhausted his will to live. They contacted the family. They told them what had happened and tried to prepare them for what they expected to come next. It was not an easy feat, admitting the limits of a technology they were trying to sell as miraculous. Still, there would always be another trial to undertake. The money was still good. Their struggle to convince the dying to keep living went on. Thank you for listening to Under 1000. I'm your host, Thomas Flower. To follow the show online, look for Under 1000 Pod on Twitter or Facebook, or check out the website at under1000pod.com. If you'd like to support the show on Patreon, go to patreon.com/under1000pod, where you can sign up to read each month's stories in advance, as well as to have a thank you be read during these credits. The theme music is an instrumental version of In Between Days by Nick Tate and the Sharks. To hear the full song and more from the same EP, go to Nick Tate, Nicdate, and thesharks.bandcamp.com, or search for them on your favourite streaming platform. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and that you'll join me again next time for some more super short fiction.